Okay, here we go. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. More people will be joining in, I'm sure, as we get started. So I want to first of all thank everyone who sent in a donation or registered beforehand. There's still an opportunity to do that, as you might see on the screen. And the place to go is to our webpage, interfaceboulder.org/payments. And your donations will help us continue Interface through the fall as we continue our programs. So a few announcements before we get started. We are currently asking for people to send in their ideas and proposals. If you want to be a speaker or know someone who might be a good speaker, we're looking for other people to join in and present from September through next August, presumably on Zoom. If something dramatic changes, then we might go back to meeting in person. But right now, our intention is to continue on the Zoom. So we're going to consider proposals as they come in, and we're hoping that we'll get a few more by July 31st. We have about half a dozen submissions right now. So again, you can see the place to go to is interfaceboulder.org/proposal if you want to consider doing that. So coming attractions, next meeting on August 21st, the third Friday, we have James D.Min, who is going to be talking about zero balancing, embodied connection to self and others. He's a licensed acupuncturist and a certified zero balancer. So put that on your calendar if it's not there already. And of course, we'll be sending out reminder emails if you're on the mailing list. If you're not on the mailing list and you're joining us for the first time, please go to interfaceboulder.org and you'll see a link to get on the mailing list, so you'll get email reminders about the upcoming meetings. So Zoom reminders, this session is being recorded, so keep that in mind during the interaction and question and answer. Make sure to mute your microphone if you're eating lunch and chewing on chips, or if you have a dog barking in the background. If you want to switch your view, you can do so. I think on the top of most people's screens, it'll show gallery view, and you can switch it to speaker view to hear our speaker. And if you have a question or have a comment, please take advantage of the chat box, the chat window. And if you want to say something during the talk, you can also find the button that says raise your hand. And that will signal us, myself and Robyn, to know that you have something you want to say. Okay. Not a good time to get a frog in my throat. Anyway, we want to welcome our speaker for today, Robyn Hubbard. And she's, name of her presentation is The Four Paths of Soulful Living and Grieving. And I want to say a few things about her in a way of introducing her. Just center that. So she's a spiritual companion, a grief counselor. She's certified compassionate bereavement care counselor and certified as a dream work facilitator, and a well-resourced guide into the depths of self, where we access our jewels of transformation and soul growth. Her background includes a Doctor of Ministry in Creation Spirituality. She has a master's in physical therapy and deep study in many body and movement-centered disciplines, and a broad array of dream perspectives, including Jungian study and indigenous wisdom experience. Her work involves spiritual inquiry, including deep dialogue and reflection, body-centered awareness, movement practices, and the exploration of dream and archetypal material. Robyn's extensive study of interspirituality and her depth of experience as a grief counselor, combined with dream work and body-mind awareness, offers a soulful approach to self-discovery. Robyn works with individuals and groups and offers retreats and community rituals supporting the cultural transformation of how grief is expressed and honored in our time. So without further ado, let's welcome our speaker, Robyn Hubbard. And we're going to spotlight you there. Okay. There's a roaring applause welcoming you here. We have 21 participants, so we'll let you take over. So thanks.
Yes, thank you, Barry. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today and joining me. And thank you. I'm just so grateful to be part of this interface community and a long-standing resource and tradition here in Boulder. And thank you to Barry and all involved in keeping this alive for so many years. Just a little bit more about myself is I've lived in and out of Boulder for a number of years, and I have bounced back and forth between the Roaring Fork Valley and here a few times, and I still split time between the Roaring Fork Valley and here. And I work for a nonprofit called Pathfinders in the Roaring Fork Valley, and I have private practice here and have some of my wonderful people from across the country on this call today too. So welcome to everyone. Thank you so much. So I am offering and I'm sharing today with you all this model of the 4 paths of soulful living and grieving. And it's a model that I have distilled over the years. I've kind of, pulled things together. It's largely based and inspired by my doctorate of ministry is originally in creation spirituality, excuse me, which is Matthew Fox's lineage and great gift to our time. If you're not familiar with him, he's a wonderful teacher and mystic prophet, really an amazing teacher, theologian of our time. So he named the 4 paths of creation spirituality, and I'm not going to get too far into those, but out of that inspiration, I created out of my experience, of my own personal experience, I created these 4 paths, and I wanted to create something more accessible and more practical and secular that is useful for everyday life and our everyday experience. And it's really, my intention is to really reframe grief as part of grief and uncertainty, really, as part of a soulfully lived life. We haven't had great modeling for that in our culture over time, and we are very much in a crisis of that time now, or at least a calling forward of that. How do we be with grief and uncertainty during these difficult and challenging times? So I'm hoping that I offer this model today, that it may be of some resource and use for you, as it has been for me. And so the 4 paths, oh, one thing that I wanted to say that I don't think Barry said is, please, if you haven't already, turn on your chat box on the bottom of your screen. If you don't know where that is, you can just click the chat icon. And I'd like to just have that on, because in a while, there's going to be some interactive parts, opportunities here, and that will give you an opportunity to share with everyone if you would like to do so. There's that invitation. So have that on if you'd like to share. So just to name the 4 paths that I'm calling are resource, release, renewal, and return. And we're going to get into, I'm going to share, and we're going to have experience with each path. This is really designed as a spiraling model and framework. There is no linearity, to it at all. It's really designed as a spiral kind of evolutionary model, and also meaning that it doesn't even spiral in one direction. We can spiral among each path can be, we can be experiencing each of these paths, together at the same time. So it's a very open opportunity, yet there is a movement to it. There's very much a movement to it to inspire growth and evolution it's really it's a model for evolving the interior life. and how our interior life inspires our outer life, our service in the world, in the community, for the collective. So again, we'll get more into that in a few minutes, but it's also I just kind of want to give you a few of the inspirations that are behind it. So again, it's the 4 paths, very deeply inspired by the 4 paths of creation spirituality. It's also very deeply inspired by the Joseph Campbell's The Heroine's Journey, where we, end up experiencing a crisis. We're set out into the quote wilderness and experience like dissolution or intense deep grief and maybe shattering or falling apart, and we discover things along the way, and then we return back to the community. That's the basic model of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and the more recently named heroine's journey as well. And there's some nuances to that, but just coming back, what is it that we have to share in our community? So there's an inspiration of that for these 4 paths of soulful living and grieving. And it's really also deeply inspired by the cycles and seasons of nature. And specifically, I use a model, a symbol of a tree. And so the evolutionary life cycle of a tree, sort of how the tree draws in nourishment from, through the roots and maybe from the sun and the air and water, and grows and out through the branches, and there's, the spring and the budding, and then eventually the leaves drop and nourish the soil again, compost in the soil to refuel the resource drawn from the soil. So, and also gives back to the air. So, so I use this tree image a lot, and in a way, I like to inspire how are we embodying our own symbolic tree, and in that way, how then are we creating a forest of mutual support? So it's really about not only our own inner, like I said, our own inner journey, our own inner evolution, but how is that inner evolution creating this expansion of support among each other, and in service, and in connection, and in community, in the small sense of community and in the larger sense of community. So hopefully we're going to be together creating planting a forest of mutual support here together today. So that's the intention. It's also out of my body-centered background, there are inspirations of the 5 rhythms, Gabrielle Roth's 5 rhythms, authentic movement. When I present this work in person, in workshop format, in retreat format, in different types of, and in rituals, there's a large body-centered component to this, because to me, this is not just an intellectual concept, but it's how are we really experiencing and embodying these paths, and making it meaningful in our life, and again, inwardly and outwardly. So, so that's just a bit of the introduction, and I think I'm going to show this. I'm going to share something with you. Let's see. As I just talk briefly about the 4 paths. This is a graphic model that I use. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Barry, can you see that? Everyone can see that? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking, so thank you. So here's the tree that I use as a symbol, and you can see the resources really drawn from the roots and from above. And I'm going to get more into how I use the tree symbol, but resources really, the path of resources, that which fills and strengthens us and bolsters us through difficult times. It's our capacity and ability to connect with a sense of awe and wonder, and just connection in general, a sense of trust, safety, drawing in creativity, spiritual connections, and a sense of flowing nature. And examples of resource, there are so many for each of us. It's unique for every one of us, but it might be faith or spirituality or nature or family, music, dance, singing, all of those things, creative expression. the things that fill us and strengthen us. And it's very important, I find, that we, especially in difficult times, turn towards resource and fill our well so that we can continue, especially in this long period of time where we're having to really wrestle with uncertainty and grief well, just a lot of grief and uncertainty. We need to continually be able to tap into this path of resource so that we can continually fill our well to bear the intensity of the challenges. So then the path of release, I like to use the symbol of the trunk of the tree and how maybe it expands out a little bit into the branches, because the trunk of the tree, so the release, the path of release is the authentic expression of emotion in this case, and how I'm using it, this model. It's the authentic expression of emotion, and more specifically, of course, the wonderful feeling emotions for some people are really easy to feel and express, and for some people actually they're hard. Don't have as much capacity to feel the harder emotions, but it's, I mean, the higher and better feeling emotions. But this also is really about, you know, the ability to authentically express the more difficult feeling emotions. And so the trunk is really about the strength of and container to hold the intensity of emotion. It's the thing that a tree, like when storms come, if you look out at a tree, maybe that's been there for hundreds or thousands of years. I did have a tree from a recent trip to Africa that's thousands of years old that I may try and share with you in a little bit. But anyway, a tree that's been around for hundreds or thousands of years has weathered many, many storms, and it's the trunk, mostly along with the roots, that keeps the tree standing, the standing one still standing. And oftentimes some trees don't, you know, they're completely uprooted and completely die. But oftentimes if they're still standing, it's the trunk, it's the strength of that trunk. So I use the image of the trunk to create the strength and the container to hold and or to witness difficult emotion. And it's about surrendering to emotion. And the other thing about emotion is the Latin root of the word emotion is emovere. I like to share that because the translation of that Latin root emovere is literally to move through. So emotions are meant to move through us. So this path I find is very important, and it's the most difficult or marginalized path in our culture, because we like to, you know, present ourselves as more upright and just, you know, rising to the occasion and being successful or all that. But this is the surrender. This is the path of surrender and giving in, and the witnessing and the sharing and being honest with ourselves and each other. And hopefully what the invitation is without judgment, which is also a difficult task. Non-judgment of ourselves and others. And obvious examples of this are anger, sadness, rage, fear, anxiety. These are the more difficult emotions. These are all emotions that are the emotions included in the experience of grief or grieving, which is moving these emotions. The next path is the path of renewal. And especially once my experience in my own personal life and working with others is that once there's an opportunity to release and move some of these, especially difficult emotions, we find a spaciousness. We find there's been a release, and there's been, even though it might feel exhausting or very intense, oftentimes what I hear and what I experience is, oh, I feel a little lighter. I feel grateful that at least I'm able to experience these feelings, or I'm grateful that someone's sitting here, a safe other sitting here witnessing me. So this path of renewal is really discovering the creative inspiration, the shifts in energy, the new thoughts or ideas. And also this is the opportunity to, you know, to discover meaning, to turn towards meaning in our lives. So this is the path of really discovering, you know, the ability to manage stress and find inspiration in the midst of chaos. So that's the path of renewal. And that's symbolized by the new growth of, the green leaves budding on a tree. And it, yeah, so I also can say more about that later, but the path of return, and then I'll come back to you all, but the path of return then is, once we discover this new inspiration out of the path of renewal, it's integrating and committing to and really integrating new ways of supporting and promoting our own health and wellness. How then can these things that we've discovered through the path of renewal, can they be integrated, committed to, be in service to ourselves first and foremost, and then to others? It's like this path of return is, it's turning our newfound awareness into action. So again, that service can be to ourselves, within our families, within our community, friends and family, communities. Larger community can be in service and giving back. It can be large initiatives. It can be, it can be the smallest thing. It can be the largest thing. But what are the things that we are really integrating and committing to in this path of return and service? So I am going to, I hope if you have wanted to, you've taken a picture of this, which is fine. I always like to share it with people, but I don't have everyone's email. So if you're interested, I can send you copies or whatever. But so I'm going to stop sharing this and come back. So those in general are the 4 paths that I'm referring to. And as you can see, there is a general movement to these to really to create and get the most, or the benefit of the evolutionary experience of them, and the just the new growth. And it's like the concentric circles on a tree. I always like to talk about that. As a tree grows, it grows in these concentric circles as you look inside the trunk. So as we're spiraling, we're growing these concentric circles of growth and evolution. But as you can see, either maybe we can be more familiar with one path than another, more comfortable with one path than another, get stuck in one path. And or we can be experiencing both 2 paths or all paths or whatever at the same time. So there's no rules to this model. It's an opportunity to, what I have found it to be useful is an opportunity for me, and when I work with clients and groups, is to recognize, where am I within this framework? And what then do I need to keep moving through? Right? And so I'm just going to leave it at that, and you can maybe consider what that, how that might, depending on which path you might find yourself in, what might you need to keep the flow, to keep the movement going, to keep the resource and support going, to keep the authentic expression and movement of emotion going, to continue growing and evolving new inspiration and creative ideas. And then that's not enough. We need to give back. We need to be in service. So it's not enough to just grow our own inner spiritual evolution. It's wonderful and incredible. But then really our call to action, I believe, and all the work that I've done with indigenous cultures and communities and wisdom, we're here for a reason, and so we need to give back. So what I would like to do is I'd like to break it down, each path now, and this is where the chat box would be nice, so that again, if we're kind of building a mutual community here of support, we can share at least in some way, just by sharing some little bits. We don't. So I can say more about that, but just if you want, have your chat box on, and you'll have the invitation to share some things. So what I'd like to do is take a minute, and I'd like to really reflect, and we're going to start with the path of resource. And so I'm going to invite you to turn your attention inward, whether that's your gaze downward or closing your eyes, whatever feels comfortable to you in this setting. And recall a time that you felt a profound sense of connection. Connected, supported, maybe even inspired by a feeling of awe and wonder. Something that possibly took your breath away, or just simply allowed you to have the experience of deep connection and rightness in the moment. And as you bring that experience or memory, maybe it was something recent, maybe it's right here and right now, maybe it's something from a long time ago, I'd like you to just get really curious about it, about what you notice about this experience. Is there a location? Is there a scene? Is there a temperature, quality of light? And then bringing it in even more deeply, do you notice sensations in your body with this feeling of connection, deep connection, awe, wonder, safety? And let it grow inside of you. Let it infuse you. And even if you are not connecting with anything right now, let yourself know that you may be inspired by what other people share. But just let that feeling grow and infuse you. And when you feel ready, you can begin to bring your attention back to the screen. And you can even consider anything related to this feeling that helps connect you to this feeling. Again, like some of the things I mentioned earlier, like nature or family or dance or singing or faith or meditation. So this is your opportunity in the chat box. I'd like to invite you to share any of those things without necessarily needing to get into story. Maybe it's just a word. Maybe it's a sensation that you had. And so I invite you to share any of those things in the chat box now. I'm not sure for some reason. Oh, here, now I'm seeing them. Yes, so some of the sharings, connections that Leonette says, some of the connections that she's had that were not of this world, spiritual and very real, sensing, touch, smell, everything, beautiful. Enchantment, Carol says, yes. Rich says peace. Carla, hello Carla. The sound of bells from the tower in Florence. Oh my gosh, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Barry, timelessness, calm. Bruce, abundant life. And so the feeling and the sensation of that. Karen, the beautiful sky at twilight. Wendy says the sense of connection and community shared in the yoga studio, chanting and singing. Absolutely. So you see all of these things, and we can inspire each other by what moves each of us, and then be inspired by how together each of us or each other are moved in this feeling of resource. And so the more that we can embody it and connect with it, we can more easily draw on it. Here's more skiing with a dear friend or family member. Absolutely beautiful. That feeling of whooshing down the mountain and being with a friend. So yeah, so we want to spend some time practicing and connecting with this path, like as resource, as what are we drawing in, like as if from the roots of our own tree, or from the branches, through the tips of our branches from above, or however we think about how we draw things in, or through our heart, and in connection with others, just really taking in this experience of the path of resource. It's very important, because when we're in the midst of that sense of falling apart, dissolution, absolute uncertainty, grief, whatever the experience might be, we may not be able to shift that quickly into these wonderful feelings, but at least we can trust and know that they're there. We can have others that can remind us and can witness and hold that with us. So that's why this path of resource is very important to continue to come back to and really honor and connect with. So thank you all for sharing so much. It's really helpful to hear all of your different things. For me, dance is absolutely my number one, and nature. Well, I guess I have many, but dance and nature and being with friends and family and my children are very much my primary deep resources. So then now we've tapped into and connected with this experience of resource. And so now we're going to turn towards the path of release. So the path of release, as I said, is this authentic expression of emotion. What's important that I like to say about this path, especially in this type of setting, and in some kind of presentation or workshop or whatever it might be, is first of all that this is the difficult path. This is the surrender, the dropping in to the grief and the difficult emotions. So be mindful and take, be tender with yourself, and just remember that we're not diving in so deep that we're going to suddenly be processing a lot of deep emotion, but we're going to drop in, and we're going to just touch into this path so that we can honor it, we can recognize it, and we can maybe experience some of its usefulness. So the other thing about this path that I'd like to say, especially during these difficult times, is that this whole situation with the pandemic and the racial stirrings of what's going on, and just all the different things, and then on top of it, all the things that are going on in our personal lives. Some of it can be, actually, without even us knowing it, can be triggering some earlier experiences, earlier possibly trauma, or earlier grief that has been unexpressed or unprocessed. So we want to be really respectful of that, and we want to be mindful of, if we notice ourselves just in any daily life situation feeling like unusually stirred by something, I think we to recognize that possibly what's happening now is that some old things that we have not dealt with, or some old traumas that maybe we have dealt with over and over again, are also or old parts of ourselves that have been unacknowledged or don't feel safe, are being triggered. So I just want to be mindful of that and respectful of that. So and in this opportunity now that we're going to just drop into this path of resource, just be, here are some options that you can allow yourself to just kind of, like you did the path of resource, just drop in and really feel it and connect with it. You can hover around, maybe above yourself, and just sort of witness yourself. You can, there's all sorts of options. You can just listen and maybe be inspired, or, by what other people share. There are many options to keep yourself feeling safe and comfortable in this kind of Zoom environment. hopefully, we're all just, kind of in this together and really holding each other like the image of the trees in the forest supporting each other. So we're kind of, in a way, all in this together. So again, this is not a time to be dropping in and really deeply processing things, but we're just going to sense and feel. And I like to talk about a window of tolerance, which is talked a lot about in psychotherapy. So oftentimes we have an experience or this level of tolerance that we feel safe and comfortable in, and it's very important that we know, recognize, or just at least respect our own window of tolerance. The opportunity here, and I really think the opportunity of these times especially, is what happens if we allow this path of resource to be engaged and give into it a little bit? And can we maybe stretch a little bit our window of tolerance? Can we grow? Can we tolerate just a little bit more of the discomfort, of the uncertainty, more maybe than we're used to? But again, only you know what's right for you at this time. So with that, all that being said, again, I'd like you to just turn your attention in whatever way that feels safe and comfortable and appropriate for you, your attention inward, gaze downward or eyes closed or however that is. Remember the resource that you just connected with potentially, or that we all shared with each other. And now give yourself permission to just tune in to any challenges, fears, anxieties, or emotions that maybe are living within you, or maybe that you're witnessing in the outer world, or maybe that you're just curious about right now. We don't need to get deeply into them, but just be curious what's living there as far as these maybe more difficult emotions, or maybe if it's even good feeling emotions that are hard to feel for you, maybe that's what it is. Remember all your options of how you want to be with these feelings. But see if you can just stay with these feelings just a little bit. Again, notice qualities of sensation that you notice associated with these emotions. And maybe be curious about, is there a feeling underneath the feeling you might be noticing? Do you notice anything in one part of your body more than another? Are there images? Give yourself permission to just acknowledge and maybe feel just a little bit more. If you have paper with you, at any time, feel free to write anything down, and when you feel ready, I just actually, before I go there, I want to share that sometimes here it can be helpful maybe to even sense pushing with your hands on your seat or pushing with your feet, and just notice, what does that do with what you're noticing in your body with these emotions? And so again, The invitation here is to share. We're all experiencing difficult and challenging emotions, especially at this time. And so if you're willing, without sharing story, just like you did so succinctly from the path of resource, whenever you feel ready, share something or a few things, an emotion, anger, sadness, anything that you have recognized in the chat box, so that we can all hold these feelings in this path of resource and respect it together. Carol says, courage. I like to say at this time, because what happens, I think, is that when people allow themselves to drop into their emotion, they notice the courage or the gratitude or whatever. And what I would say is oftentimes that's a little bit more going to the next path already, this path of renewal. Like, yes, in the midst of it all, I recognize courage. So thank you for sharing that, Carol, because it is right here with us right now. So thank you for sharing that. Sadness, Stephanie says. Carla, regret that I never traveled to Florence with my now dying father to hear those bells. Karen, vulnerability, tender-hearted. Carrie says tension and fear. Yeah. Yes. Dawn says ungroundedness. Absolutely. Wendy, betrayal. Yeah. Catherine says separation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Overwhelmed. Marcia, thank you. Bruce says activism to overcome helplessness and hopelessness. And again, activism may be the piece that is leading us towards the path of renewal, and the helplessness and hopelessness is this path of release that is what leads us there. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. And for me, it was one thing that I accessed yesterday was definitely some anger and my ability to say no. I had to call on that one strongly yesterday, and still living with me today. Yeah. And maybe it's just, if I'm checking myself too, that ability to say no kind of came out of that renewal. It's like that piece of renewal, like, okay, I've found a strength inside of me to speak up in a new way. So really what the anger and the crossing of my boundaries or my values really led me there. So thank you all for sharing that. And again, it's just to honor. It's just, there's nothing to do with these feelings right in this moment, but to, in this path of release, give ourselves permission to just recognize them and to feel them and to wrestle with them, and to hopefully find the support that we might need in the midst of them, and or draw on these other things that have already come forward, the courage and the activism and things. So thank you all for sharing, and your willingness to just name that path for what it is. It's again, it's not modeled very much in our culture, especially in a public forum. Maybe a little more in Boulder. I'm not sure, actually. So thank you for publicly sharing just some of the feelings. So I just remembered I had some poems that I was going to share for each path. So I'm just going to share this for the path of release. There is a brokenness out of which come the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerge strength. there is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart, as we break open to the place inside, which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing. So again, this kind of mixed the path of release and also moving into the path of renewal in that poem, and that's by Rashani. Excuse me. So now we'll turn towards the path of renewal, which has already been invoked, some through your words and through this poem. But allow yourself to just check in, tune in with yourself again. And what are you noticing now? As we've given ourselves and each other this permission to share difficult, what some people consider maybe messy or hidden or maybe ugly, at least how, what our cultural beliefs have come to make them. We've shared some of these things. So what are you noticing now? Do you notice any, along with the courage and the inspiration for activism that's already been named, and the ability to speak up, do you notice any different sensations or images that might be available to you as you sort of maybe explore the spaciousness that's around these difficult emotions, or coming forward through them? Are there any energy changes, creative ideas? Just as you consider just even the permission to share authentically. So in this path of renewal, any new awareness about yourself, about others, or about your situation or the collective situation? And again, if you don't feel anything like this or related to this, don't worry. Let's be inspired by each other. Also, with this sense of renewal, what do you notice in your body? Again, it's easier in our habitual way of being to start thinking about things, but what do you notice in your body? Are there any shifts in feeling or sensation or quality of weightedness or anything, a location in your body that you notice more than another, or maybe even an impulse for movement? So again, the invitation is, as you discover these things, to just, as you all have been so succinctly sharing, anything that feels really connected to this path of renewal and some new inspiration coming forward. If you can share, yes, thank you. Carrie, instead of a heavy concrete block of tension, I feel lighter and envision a blank canvas. Beautiful. Carol says, lead with the heart. Yes. There's that remembering, that possibility. There's more possibility in this path of renewal. When we're in the path of release and it's stuck in the grief and the emotions, oftentimes we feel really constricted. But it's, again, especially if we're supported by another, there's more possibility available. Carla says, gratitude with a release of regret. Awesome. Bruce says, unity and wholeness. Beautiful. Wendy, release, relief, and breathing deeper. Yes, breathing deeper. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to breathe deeply during these times, every day or every minute. We don't know what the next instruction or the next number or statistic or the next tragedy or whatever is going to be. So to recognize an opportunity to breathe deeper, just recognize it. It's, we're going to keep moving in and out of all these different paths, but recognize it and honor it for what it is. Dawn says, duality, two opposites can both be true. Absolutely. Recognizing two can both be true. And honestly, one of my teachers, Jeremy Taylor, used to talk about the definition of compassion is our increasing capacity to hold duality or paradox. And so I've really come to trust that myself, is that the more that I'm able to hold paradox and duality, the more my heart opens in compassion, because I'm able to just hold more. Yes, thank you. If there's anything else, please feel free to share. This is, again, just to remind you, this path of renewal is really about maybe discovering meaning of our lives, or meaning making, or remembering meaning. What is the meaning? What is the purpose of my life? How do I need to contribute right now? You know, what do I have available to me that I can contribute, that I'm just remembering or I'm discovering about myself? Or making meaning, not that anyone's, you know, death or loss or whatever has, you know, we can say is meaningful, but what oftentimes how we discover courage or our capacity to just walk through the dark forest and the difficult, you know, depths of grief. We can discover some meaning in the midst of that. So again, this is the path of renewal. It's the green buds or the new leaves on the tree. It's how the tree, the regenerative nature of the tree every spring continues to grow, continues to bring forth new life, no matter what storms it has endured. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, you know, it's a tree has an illness, or it doesn't make it through a difficult storm or whatever. But maybe there's a little growth. So just to recognize all these things as a path of renewal. And it's also the path of renewal is the path to resilience. This is how we cultivate and develop our capacities for resilience, to draw from that well of resilience that, you know, again, in this current situation, how can we discover stores of resilience or discover new capacities for resilience to keep managing through these difficult times. So that leads us then to the path of return. And so the path of return, again, is when we have, you know, what we've discovered through the, you know, through the path of renewal, this path of new growth and meaning making and discovering new things about ourselves and shifts in energy and inspirations and creative ideas. Maybe you can reflect on now anything that you have discovered or shared with us for yourself, or what other people have shared as inspiration. Is there anything that you are discovering for yourself right now, or realizing or connecting with, that you can practice integrating and committing to, and really integrating into your life moving forward? And it does, and the practice is a really important word, because this path of return, you know, sometimes we discover something and like, yes, I'm going to breathe more deeply, and then suddenly we're back up here and we're breathing shallow again. And so it's the path of return is like with the remembering, oh right, open my heart, you know, allow myself to remember the capacity and the ability to breathe more deeply. And so we have to practice this path a bit. And then how can these things be in service to yourself and, or like I said before, your family, your friends, your community, the collective? Sometimes just the shift in what I commit to, or what you or each of us commit to, is enough, because it shifts it shifts the energy of the collective. So, but we have to continue to come back to that and practice that in service to ourselves, and it does make a difference. So those are, you know, some of the smaller, large things that maybe it's a, like I said, the idea of, you know, what are the ideas for the activism that came forward early out of the hopelessness and helplessness. So, so anything again in the chat that wants to be shared. And I see a question for the poems. And yes, thank you for the reminder. I'd like to share first these inspirations of return in the chat. I will share the poem for return. It's a small quote actually, and it might be inspiring. For the path of return, this path that we're on. It's from Hildegard of Bingen. With my mouth, God says, I kiss my own chosen creation. I uniquely, lovingly embrace every image I have made out of the earth's clay. With a fiery spirit, I transform it into a body to serve all the world. So with that, how are you, if you want to share, being in service to yourself and or the outer world in this path of return? So please, I invite you to share some of these ways. And it might not be fully formed. It might not be, it might be something you've witnessed in someone else, like something that you're inspired to maybe want to do or try, but you don't quite have it yet, you know. These are just some ideas of how to access this path of return. Ah, yes, Cheryl, when you're leading with your heart and in service, there's nothing to fear. So leading with the heart and trusting and continuing to come back to that commitment. Because I know for myself, I can start going back up into my head, but oh, right, soften into my heart. So thank you for that reminder. And Carrie, take time to sit with the difficult emotion. Absolutely. That is the path of return. Thank you so much. It's giving yourself permission to take time to sit with those emotions. That is not only in service to yourself, it's in service to all of us and to the whole collective, because it's a very lost quality and ability in our culture, and a very needed thing to be reclaimed into a soulfully lived life. Wendy says, remembering my strength, wisdom, and spirituality. Yes. Remembering, continue to remember. Remember what you have, remembering your resource, right? That's another path of return. It's the commitment to remember it, commitment to go back and connect with strength, you know, wisdom, resource, whatever, you know, spirituality, whatever your resources are. Yes, thank you. Barry says, the return to my mind has to do with experiencing and sharing being in a moment of presence with others in practice of work and life. Yes, thank you. Share being in a moment of presence. Absolutely, with others and in practice of work and life. Beautiful. Bruce says, letting grief wash over me in small, gentle waves. Yes. And that's another important thing about that we can really honor. Thank you for bringing that up. The small waves, like titrating, you know, we don't have to just suddenly fall on the floor and just, you know, open ourselves, surrender to the immensity of emotion, especially long held and repressed, maybe transgenerational, you know, emotions that we might be carrying. Let it wash over in the small, gentle waves. I love it. It's beautiful. Let it come slowly. Practice it. That's the only way we can practice. Because if we get blown out of the water, then forget it. The whole thing's over. Carla says, finding a song to represent this time. Yes, a song that feels meaningful. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say for me, as far as, something that came out of a path of return out of this time, is I have been um, similar to this actually presentation. I have been offering, especially through our nonprofit, um, in the valley up there, but offering, this came out of a path of return is to offer these 4 paths as a resilience-based model of how to be with these very difficult times. And that came to me in a moment when all this first started. I was like, what can I do? And so I started sharing these online workshops. They were much more workshop oriented format. So that, again, that was like an initiative that I realized, oh, this is what I can do. This is what I can offer. So. Anything else that wants to be shared? Matthew Fox talks about in his 4 paths of creation spirituality, they're the via positiva, via negativa, via creativa, and via transformativa. So the via transformativa is sort of the inspiration for the path of return. And he really talks about the importance of justice. Like via transformativa, for him, he speaks to being in service to justice in our world. And I think it's important to name that here, because again, these little things and bigger things, if we can remember that this path of return is in service to justice in our experience, in our life, in our state of the world, in our all the challenges that we're all having inwardly and outwardly, which I think if it's outward, we're struggling with it inwardly anyway, that we are in service to justice, and in the largest sense, I think, of justice in the world, because it's not just making right or wrong. It's about really transforming old ways. So we through this path of return, if you can remember, it's being in service to that type of real transformation, inwardly and outwardly. There's another one, Catherine, dissolving barriers to actualizing shared values. Dissolving barriers. Yep. And I feel like that comes back to the ability to hold duality or paradox or difference, barriers. I don't know if that's what you mean, but that's what comes to mind when I hear that. And dissolving or holding, or our ability to hold more and open our hearts to more compassion, for me, that helps you dissolve those barriers so we can connect in the shared values. So thank you. Carol says, trust that I am enough and come out of hiding. Please, please do. I think I can really relate with that one, relate to that one. And I don't know, I'm sure many of us can, but for especially those of us introverts, it's important. Like I just went to Africa, West Africa, with Malome in January, and I'm so grateful to have gotten to go before everything was shut down, and spent 2 weeks in his native village that he grew up in. And it was incredible, the experience of witnessing, but then also after only 2 weeks, I wish I was there much longer, but I was able to experience the feeling that they live with, which is the knowing of their belonging in the world. That you could see it in the children's eyes, way different than anything I've ever experienced here. Just in their eyes, you could see that they knew that they belonged to this planet. They belonged to the community they live in with nothing. They had, material nothing. But what I longed for that they had in the midst of my material world, and not only the children, but the elders. It was incredible to be in just in the space, sitting with elders of that community and feeling their weight and their oldness and their wisdom and how they're looked to in their community. It was astounding. And so hopefully this path of return is really about that, Carol, is about remembering, what do I have to offer? I'm here for a reason, and it's important. As a matter of fact, I think we're being implored or compelled or something shaken right now to come out of hiding in ways that we have had the privilege of hiding before. So hopefully we can all remember that in some way. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So if there is nothing else, I think I might go back to the poem of resource that I forgot to share, and maybe end there and then open it up for discussion, questions, responses, whatever might be here. So this is a poem by Mary Oliver, and I pulled it for the path of resource, and it's called The Sun. You may know it. Have you ever seen anything in your life more wonderful than the way the sun every evening, relaxed and easy, floats toward the horizon and into the clouds or the hills or the rumpled sea and is gone? And how it slides again out of the blackness every morning on the other side of the world like a red flower, streaming upward on its heavenly oils, say on a morning in early summer, at its perfect imperial distance. And have you ever felt for anything such wild love? Do you think there is anywhere in any language a word billowing enough for the pleasure that fills you as the sun reaches out, as it warms you, as you stand there empty-handed? Or have you too turned from this world? Or have you too gone crazy for power, for things? So may we all hold that image that Mary Oliver evokes for us, and that intensity of witnessing the sun and its majesty and the sense of love that stirs each day, each morning at dawn, and each evening in the, in the sun setting. And yeah, with that, I leave you with open it up for whatever wants to be shared, or if there are questions. So Barry, I don't know how.
Thanks, Robyn. I so much appreciate not just the content of what you just presented, but also your person, of who you are and the things that you brought to just raising questions and sharing some of the work that you've been doing. It sounds like you've had a lot of contact with people that inspired you, and I want to open it up to other people to make some comments about if they feel some inspiration during this hour that we've had. We have some time to make it a community conversation. So feel free to unmute yourself, and I'd like to welcome other people to join in. Who wants to go first? Did the model that Robyn presented directly connect with a personal experience that you've had regarding the current COVID situation, or with grief and death and loss in your life? Anyone willing to speak to that?
I do see a question here on the chat from Bruce.
Okay.
He started noting that we live with grief and uncertainty. Could you say more about that? Well, I mean, I guess what I can say is, first of all, in the midst of just this, COVID crisis alone, and the racial stirrings, and just this current time, I feel that I personally myself don't have not been able to escape the grief that has washed over me and through me, and also the uncertainty, like I said, of each day, sometimes multiple times a day, shifting statistics and numbers of how many people have died and who's died alone, and who what of my in my inner circle or outer circle has contracted the virus, and how are they doing. And so that's just in this microcosm, and also the racial inequities. And I have to say, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm just saying how it really speaks to me. And I'll say one more thing about it. But when I spoke about like how these times are stirring old traumas especially at the very beginning, and actually it continues on for me at the beginning of this virus, and when things and now again, but hearing the tragedies and the whole the statistics out of New York, and the stories we were hearing, and the images and things, it really triggered the ancestral trauma of the Holocaust for me, because it felt, as a Jewish woman, it felt similar to the loss of control, like what was being described in the halls, people dying in the halls of the hospitals, and I just, all the images, it really triggered some deep grief that is ancestral for me. And so, and a lot of uncertainty. And again, for me, some of the things that are being spoken about or, modeled, with the administration, and, without getting political, some of that has also triggered some of that uncertainty and fear and grief. And then also the racial inequities, with the Black Lives Matter and the tragedies that we've witnessed, an immense amount of grief. So that's just on this current state of affairs and how it's triggered my past. But I would say that I was listening to Stephen Jenkinson actually just this morning. I don't know, some of you may be familiar with him. He's also one of my deep teachers and mentors. And he was talking about that we have to acknowledge grief as part of our existence, our experience, because as soon as we remember that how deeply we love someone is because we know that there's the risk that someday we will lose them, that we're already grieving. So grief is part of our experience, and then the uncertainty goes right along with that, because we don't know what our life or our loved ones' lives or the collective or the world or the environmental crisis, we don't, and everything that goes along with it, we don't know. Nothing is certain. So that we live with grief, and to acknowledge it is actually radically transformative, I think, in our culture. And to find, like I said, just really quickly, in Africa, I witnessed, and I had learned about them, and I'd actually experienced the Dagara tradition, which is the indigenous culture that Malidoma Somé is from. I've experienced over here a Dagara grief ritual, a few of them, and they're incredible and powerful. But witnessing one over there in their native culture, when someone dies, there is a 3-day ritual where the entire community, and actually people from surrounding communities, come and gather, and it just goes on and on. Not only, it's actually the way Malidoma describes it, and what I experienced and just felt by standing by. We were not welcomed in because it was just not our, place to be there. But it was, we were able to witness and feel the experience. The close family members, of course, were deeply wailing and grieving the loss of their loved one. But everyone is welcome in this grief ritual to come. And it's like an opportunity, it's actually an honoring of the person who's died to come and share and move and express your grief of all, not even related to that person at all, or maybe partially related, or what that person reminds you of in your own life. It's like an opportunity to acknowledge grief as part of a soulfully lived life. And this happens on a very regular basis there. And so they move, they stay current with their grief. They stay connected to the understanding that grief lives with us, and that if we can continually move it, then it can be, it can enliven our lives in a whole different way, and also can honor those that have been lost and the things that we have lost in a whole different way than we do in our culture too. So that was a long-winded question. I hope that answered it some. So, anyone else?
I would just say that I think in the future we'll be looking back to 2020, not realizing how significant this period is that we're living through, with social unrest and injustice, racial injustice, and with financial upset for many people, and health taken for granted. And all of a sudden, perhaps if we do move into the fall and winter where the virus mutates or scenario changes before we find a way to address treatment or a cure, that this year we're all kind of naive to the moment that we're experiencing right now, and having resilience to know what to do with grief from our own past or in generations past, or a culture as you're describing, may prove to show who can survive or endure or find resources and resilience through any hard times that we may have ahead. We'd like to think that politics will get better and the virus will be cured, and we'll go out to eat and celebrate somehow. But we don't know anything more about where we're headed. And
I think the political response to the pandemic has actually given us the opportunity to see that money is available to fund whatever the government values. And our particular government values the stock market and people having money so they can spend, so the economy looks good, and apparently doesn't value health very much. I mean, whenever there has been a question, like back in the primaries, like, how are you going to pay for that when it came to healthcare? Well, we have the money to pay for what we value. And this pandemic has demonstrated that by, the trillions that have been poured into the stock market and to buy corporate debt and, it's running the government's running a deficit, and it's a so what, but that's a really good thing to realize, that that running a deficit is appropriate and not harmful. But the question that we need to grapple with is, what is it that we value and where do we want to put the money? Because a government deficit from the federal government is money in someone's pockets. And so far it's not the right pockets, but in my view, but it just, it's like nobody asks, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay to give everybody the $600 a week extra until the end of July? Well, obviously we can. We can do that. We did it. No problem. No one said, how are you going to pay for it? So I think that's like a bright side of, it shows, you know, sort of the hidden resources that the government wants to control, but, you know, they don't really want us to know that they have the money to do whatever they value. And now we know that, or we could know that.
Yeah, just to go back to this model of the four paths, I mean, just to kind of tease that out, some of what you're describing is the path of renewal, like ideas of, you know, discovering or at least experiencing in a new way, you know, what is available. And then also the path of release, the grief around the choices that are being made that may not match our values, and or the health and safety of the people, of the collective. And yeah, we could probably go on and on about the political nature of things, but
I could, but I will spare you.
yeah, maybe we, you know, yeah, but thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And one thing I wanted to respond back to what you said, Barry, is I can't remember. Just in response to talking about, and this takes me back to Stephen Jenkinson and how he talks, and also my experience of being a grief counselor, and also my experience of actually having to live through a number of life-threatening challenges. Like, yes, we all hope for, you know, drawing on the resilience and the strength and the things that we need to make it through this and hopefully be better off, you know, through it and out of it and because of it. And hopefully it's because we've wrestled with things and we've transformed something, you know, positively or evolutionarily anyway, in our own lives and in the collective. But it's also, this is the piece that I'm bringing back from Stephen Jenkinson, and then also my own experience, is there's also endings. And there's also this, it's an important time, I think, to recognize that death is part of a soulfully lived life, actually. And it's so in our face right now, so many people dying. And yes, it's absolutely devastating and heartbreaking, especially if it's been a close family member or a loved one. And I think it's important to recognize, especially for our culture, who has again, in Stephen Jenkinson's words, and also my experience, a phobia around death, that it shouldn't happen or that it's a failure, that I don't find that to be true in all of my experience. And he describes it so much more eloquently and articulately. But I think it's an opportunity that we're in to wrestle with that reality that some of us won't make it through this time, and some of us won't have the resilience for whatever reason. And that's not because we didn't try hard enough or whatever, or maybe it is, I don't know. I just wanted to name that piece as well. So I don't know how people feel about that, but.
For those of us in the role of counselors and clergy, clinicians and clergy, it is going to place a further demand on our role, our services, and having this discussion and bringing this model is suggestive of what kind of skill base or what kind of foundation we need to provide by practicing it ourselves first. I think that's the message that one of the messages I'm taking away from your presentation today.
Right. And I share this, I actually have shared this model, you know, and I alter it in the appropriate ways for whatever, you know, whoever I'm speaking to, but I've used this with teachers, I've used this with hospital caregivers, you know, community people, and also a lot of, you know, people in the just in whatever caregiving field, whether it's clergy or therapists. I've used it in all those settings and with all those types of people. And my hope too is that this is not something I totally created. As I said, I've just distilled it into a hopefully and presented in a hopefully usable model that I like to also share. One way that I use it when I'm working with people is, for example, because I think what is difficult for most people, or for a lot of people, for a lot of us, it's, difficult for me too, though I have to practice it a lot every day working with others, is like when someone comes in, or I'm working with someone or a group or whatever with a lot of intense emotion, and they're in it deep, and they need to release, they need their, whatever they're doing, they might be completely falling apart or whatever. I really embody that strength of the tree. And this is why I like to use, like when I'm in person and things, and even now, if you want to just kind of explore how this feels in your body, but the strength of the trunk of the tree. I get myself, I'm like, oh boy, I need to really be in my trunk so that I can witness, I can be present with someone without needing to change them, without needing to do anything different, but let them release. Because that's what is being called for and being asked of them and of me as witness. And that is also true whether it's a friend, a family member, a client, whatever, is that we can embody that, the strength, and draw from our roots and our resource and whatever it is we need to do to bear witness to the intensity, so that we don't try and stop and change people and make them and pacify and try and make them feel better. Because I think what's most needed right now is let those feelings move through, and trust that that person and myself, I can sit with it, or if it's my own turn, that I can make it through that wave, and that there's going to be something on the other side. I think it gets stilted and stunted when we try and repress it, or we override that whole idea of titrating. That's a whole nother concept. But there's lots of things we can do. But I think that ability to really embody the strength of the trunk when you're bearing witness to someone's difficult emotions can be helpful. I hope that it's useful in that way. That's my hope. And then also, as far as that model goes, if you're a caregiver on any level, that you can also recognize, like when someone is, say, made it through a difficult wave of emotion, and then suddenly they're like spent, like I said, but they are like breathing maybe a little deeper, or their shoulders have relaxed. You can recognize that. And we can honor that for each other, and we can witness that too. So there's the path of renewal, or remind someone about their strengths and resources, and to draw from the path of resource, and or take someone's, oh my God, out of that release, I recognize this strength. Great, then how can you really use that in service to yourself and others? So that's what I just want to, along with what you said, Barry, to make this useful in whatever way that it feels useful or seems useful for you. That's my hope. Yeah.
I was just going to add that I see it as having a real good application to working with children. I work with children in grief groups and in individuals, and kids are so visual that I really think that the tree and the roots and the leaves could be a good way for them to understand and express their grief and their process.
Absolutely. I also work with some children as well. I work with all age ranges, and with children, it has been very useful to draw trees, and then just talk about, just weave that in, or ask questions or whatever, and see how the tree evolves.
Right.
It's very powerful and useful. I have done that. So yeah.
Because, we're noticing that we're getting a whole new type of grief with our children groups because of COVID. Losses through death, and then just the disappointments of not being in school or not being able to be with friends. That's grief. That kind of disappointment is definitely grief for them.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for doing that work.
Thank you.
Let's see. Bruce says, through is the best way out. Robert Frost. Correction. Oh, the best way out is always through. Yeah, yes, absolutely. I find the only way out from, in my experience for me, has been through. And yeah. And then in and through and in, it's to me, it's that continuum. It's that spiraling. We come out, and that's where we offer, what we've sort of gained from that going through, and we share, and then sure enough, at some point we find ourselves back in again and through, hopefully.
Another comment as a takeaway is the importance of taking the position of listening and inviting other people to go inside themselves, rather than us brilliant therapists or thinking that we have something wise to say. So the guidance, the guided imagery, or the leads to go inside is an important metaphor for where our resources are. They're not outside of ourselves or out in the world, but the bottom line is, where do we go? Where do we turn to inside ourselves, in a spiritual way, or in a personal strength, or integrity, or a sense of well-being? All those things are inside, but we get distracted with pain and suffering and fear and anxiety and stress that comes from outside ourselves.
And sometimes that pain and anxiety and stress and trauma creates the inability to access those inner strengths. And so sometimes the outer resources can be really useful, so that someone can experience a quality, like just looking at nature and then tuning in, like you said, Barry, like that then you tune in. Well, what do you feel when you look at that sun or that mountain or that sky, or whatever it is for someone? It's not always nature, but having people come up with things that inspire them, or that, I don't know, and then tuning into, well, what does that feel like then? And that helps bring people back, sometimes, who can't access the inner resources.
Mm-hmm. Some more comments from others? Hi, Jude. Are there other things that people are using in their own life or in their work in the way of addressing grief with clients or with family members or circumstances? This is the awkwardness of Zoom, when people have their mics off and you can't see them.
Yeah.
We don't know. Well, if there's no other comments, maybe we can bring this to a close. And
I do see one more comment here. Very
okay.
sorry. Carrie says, as an empath, this seems to need to be a daily practice with everything going on. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so then again, how this model, this 4 paths model, if you can, as an empath, or whatever you might be experiencing, where are you in a certain moment, and what do you need? So if you're feeling and taking in a lot as an empath, maybe some release is in order. Maybe the need for really checking in with whether it's your own emotion stirring or what you're feeling outwardly or in the collective, whatever ways that is true for each of us. move some of that and to honor it and to let it move through us and stay current with our own grief. Or maybe it's, I need to draw from resource more so I can bear the intensity of everything that I'm feeling or you're feeling as an empath. So again, hopefully this model can be helpful in that way to discover where you are and what you might need moving forward to support yourself. Karen says, how to use as practice, go through the 4 to remind myself? Well, I think I understand. I think you're just asking, how do you use this as a practice? Again, just to say, some of it is just taking that time for self-reflection. Barry, I think that you were bringing that up before, the reminder of self-reflection and checking in and being tuning in to, like, if I'm using this, how I use this myself is, where am I right now? You know, what am I noticing? What am I feeling? What's the predominant state that I'm experiencing? And first of all, just noticing that, you know, because then once we notice and we have awareness, then we have choice of how we need to respond. So first it's just the noticing and the awareness, and then tuning into, then, you know, for each of us, it's going to be different. What do I need? You know, like I find in this time for myself as a grief counselor, and the intensity of, you know, sitting with people in a lot of intense grief, which I happen to really, I know it's my path and my purpose and I love it. And sometimes I know, actually all the time, I have to really every day check in with myself. And what do I need to continually move things that have either been triggered inside of me or things that I'm just carrying because I've been so moved by people's stories, which is probably triggering something inside of me, but you know what I mean? So it's just checking in with what then, how do I need to be with that, notice it, and then what do I need to support that? Either let it move through, bolster my resource. Great, looks like I answered that. Yeah, it's a great question. And it just takes some practice, you know, to, yeah, just takes some practice to, and that's why I like to use the tree image, you know, and when I'm in person in a group, especially in a, you know, a collective group, I have that faded tree that was on the graphic worksheet that I showed you. And we really fill in, you know, we go through and together collectively, all the things that you shared on the chat, we fill in resource in the roots and above where the sky, you know, where the sun is. And we fill in the release, the intensity of emotions in the trunk, and we create a collective image. And you can do that on your own. You can make your own tree, like, you know, just create a tree or print out a tree or, you know, whatever. And you can actually, you can start gathering, you know, that every time you feel or notice something that you recognize it as a certain path, you can write it in. We did that as a family, again, at the beginning of this, or, you know, towards the beginning of this whole quarantine. And I was doing all these workshops with people, and I was creating all these collective tree images and all these things filled in, and they were so inspiring and so meaningful that I thought, wow, I made a tree, and we made a big poster, and I hung it up next to for our family, and we hung it up next to our dining room table. And every time, and I have teenagers, or a 12 and a 17-year-old, every time we were talking about something and we were feeling something or sharing something, we put it on the tree, like where it belonged, and kind of and captured some things. And then we were able to see, well, what are the things out of this whole experience do we want to continue to carry forward in our family life and in our personal lives? So that's another way to practice with it.
There's a comment up above from Carol. Carol, do you want to say something more about your comment?
Sorry, I was muted. Not just that I've just learned to be honest with friends and people when they ask how I'm doing, rather than just saying I'm fine or I'm getting through. Just saying, you know, if I'm having a day today, I'm feeling grief, and I'm participating in a creativity class, and we were supposed to write an article. I can't remember what the prompt was, but it was inviting people to be in a good place. And I chose to be honest. The image I saw was a tree outside my window, and that my attention was going to the dead branches that represented the part of me that feels kind of dead right now and kind of crispy. And I was fearless in sharing that with this group, because I know the expectation was to write something lovely and something beautiful, but it was well received, and an invitation to the people in my group to recognize that, yeah, there can be a lot of beautiful things happening, and at the same time there's those dead branches that need to be tended to as well.
Revolutionary, Carol. Thank you. Thank you for the courage to share your truth, authentically expressing where you were in that moment. And I think the more that we can all practice that, and how you describe how well it was received. Again, that's, to me, that part of that reclaiming grief as part of a soulfully lived life, as part of the beauty. It doesn't have to feel amazing and look shiny and whatever. It can be like the dead branches. It can be heavy and intense, but by sharing it, there's so much beauty in that, because it's real, it's authentic. And you know, that just reminds me of people ask me how I can do what I do day after day. And I know there are some of you also on here who do this work as well. And to me, it's like, it's when people come to me and share their truth and vulnerability, it's so much more real than what I experience in everyday life in our interactions. So I find it so nourishing. And so anyway, thank you for that vulnerability to share and have such an amazing and welcome response to it, Carol.
Thank you.
Rich has a question that he posted there.
Do you recommend any resources for better understanding this process? Someday I'll have a book. You know, I don't know about the whole process. I mean, works by Matthew Fox and, you know, Creation Spirituality come to mind, where he speaks about the 4 paths of creation spirituality. He has so many books. Original Blessing is one of them. I don't remember which ones he, you know, just Creation Spirituality is another one. That's one, because he really talks about this whole, you know, process. Is it Margaret Mead? She has a whole approach, kind of with a similar process. One book that comes to mind, it's more just about the path of release, you know, it is the Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. You know, that's another resource around just, you know, being with sorrow as a practice, and reclaiming it as a part of our soulfully lived life. So I don't know if that's helpful, but hopefully those are a few resources. And then there's Joseph Campbell's, you know, Hero's Journey, I think is, you know, another opportunity to reflect on how this 4 paths speaks to each of you, and then people who have further taken that into the heroine's journey as well. So those are some thoughts and ideas that come forward now. Oh, sure. Rich says thanks. Yeah.
Any last questions, comments? Before we wrap up here, we have a few minutes left if we need it. right. So, well, many thanks. Okay. So,
Absolutely.
perhaps let's bring this to a close, and want to thank you so much, Robyn, for your presentation and bringing all of this moment for us to reflect and to dig a little deeper into some things that are always going to be relevant, unfortunately. I think the point of we're living in the context of grief, and we're headed towards grief. There's no way to avoid it. So thank you so much. And
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for really participating and yeah, and and just thank you.
okay.
And feel free. I think my contact is somewhere available. Is that right, Barry? Anyway, feel free to.
It's on the webpage, and I could share a screen again to show everyone your contact.
Sure. Feel free to reach out anytime and with questions or.
And another commercial to join us again next month. And donations are still always welcome. This recording will be edited and posted as a video on our YouTube channel. We now have a Interface Boulder YouTube channel, and I'll also post the link in our Facebook page so that you can access it through there as well. So, okay, let's call it a day. Thank you again so much. Be well. Take care, everyone.
Well.